Dear participants, I would like to welcome you to today's German-Israeli webinar on the topic Corona, Tracing and Privacy. Privacy is one of the most controversial topics during the current Corona crisis in both countries, Israel and Germany. The webinar is hosted by the Friends of Tel Aviv University, the German association to support Israel's largest university. There's a close cooperation between the law faculty of the Frankfurt Goethe University and the Buchmann Faculty of Law of the Tel Aviv University. My name is Michael Herold. I'm a lawyer at Graf von Westphalen law firm in Frankfurt in the practice areas of data protection, information technology, telecommunication, and cybersecurity, and I will guide you through the next hour. We're happy to support this webinar with our platform. We are very pleased about the great interest of this webinar. We have about 180 registrations from Israel and Germany from various professional backgrounds. This shows the importance of this topic. The close cooperation between the Goethe University and the Tel Aviv University allowed us to gain two internationally very renowned experts in the field of privacy law, information law and technology. Professor Indra Spieker from the Frankfurt Goethe University and Professor Michael Bienhak from the Tel Aviv University. I will introduce both experts in more detail just before the expert dialogue. It will certainly be interesting to find out whether and to what extent the Israeli and German perspectives have something in common and what the reasons are for perhaps different approaches. Sandra Simovic, General Consul of the State of Israel, and Uwe Becker, Mayor of the City of Frankfurt, President of the Friends of the Tel Aviv University in Germany, President of the German-Israeli Association, Federal State of Hesse Commissioner for Anti-Semitism, have recorded their welcome addresses on video. Unfortunately, due to scheduling reasons, neither of them can participate live. Following these two video greetings, Christian Kosulis, also a lawyer at Graf von Westphalen and head of the Rhine-Main office of the German-Israeli Economic Association, will address his greetings to you live from Frankfurt. But before that, two short organizational notes. This webinar, except for the Q&A session, will be recorded and subsequently made available online on various channels. And immediately following the expert discussion, you will have the opportunity to ask questions directly to the experts. If you want to ask questions, please make this clear by raising your hands using the hand signal button. You will then be activated to ask the questions by one of our IT staff, who will also tell your name, the name of the asking person. And now we'll see the welcome addresses by Sandra Simovic and then of Uwe Becker.
Shalom from Munich. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's webinar on the topic of Corona, Tracing and Privacy. I'm particularly happy to be part of today's webinar since before I began my diplomatic career, I studied law, my BA and MA at the Tel Aviv University at the Buchmann Faculty of Law, and I really remember it as a wonderful time. So I'm very grateful for having this opportunity to be part of this webinar this evening. And I'm very happy to join you in listening to Professor Dr. Michael Bienhak from the Tel Aviv University and to Professor Dr. Indra Spieker from the Goethe University Frankfurt. We, as the Israeli General Consulate for Southern Germany, have very close ties to both universities, and I highly appreciate their academical work. Today's topic is very relevant, and I'm very excited to hear what our experts will have to say. From my own experience in Germany, I can say that there are quite clear differences in the attitude towards privacy in Germany and in Israel. In both countries, of course, privacy is important. But in Germany, it often seems to have almost a holy status. In Israel, the right of privacy is a basic right that appears in one of the basic laws that we have. Israel doesn't have a formal constitution, but rather has a body of basic laws, and the right to privacy is based in one of those laws. Still, it is not an absolute right, and of course it can be balanced with other rights, such as, if we take the Corona example, ensuring the security and safety of the country and the population. New technologies now, especially during Corona times, they have of course lots of advantages, but they also bring with them create all kinds of ethical problems, which needs to be discussed openly. As you can see from the demonstrations that take place all over Germany now, the corona also bring with it all kinds of conspiracy theories that spread around and that speak about a world government or a big brother surveilling you. Therefore, I believe it's becoming more and more essential when implementing tracing technologies to try and act in transparency and to take into consideration the need to ensure that people don't lose their trust in their governments. In this context, the judiciary, the legislative, the executive, but also the civil society have to make sure that the collected information is being used only for its original purpose. Of course, I'm sure that all these topics and many other interesting issues will come up in our webinar now. So I really would warmly welcome our speakers and wish every one of us listening and participating in this webinar a very interesting and fruitful exchange of thoughts. תודה רבה, ערב טוב, bis bald.
Be part of the next big idea. Welcome to Tel Aviv University.
Shalom וברוכים הבאים. Welcome to this very special German-Israeli webinar on the questions of health and privacy in times of Corona. In the name of the Friends of Tel Aviv University, I'm happy to be able to address all of you here and to welcome you to this very special event. Of course, we all would love to meet in person and hold such a special event in direct conversation. But thanks to the digitalization, it is possible, besides all aspects that we have to face in times of Corona, that we are able to host such an event online. And perhaps this is also showing the different bridges that we have in between Germany and Israel, in between the universities like Tel Aviv University and Goethe University, which is also partner tonight of this event. There are many more other partners that I want to welcome. Of course, the State of Israel, here in person of the Council General, Mrs. Sandra Simovic, and all the other representatives of the German-Israeli Economy Association, of course, the Frankfurt Wirtschaftsförderung, the Economic Development Association, as well as Deal Communication, and all those who made this very special event here possible, like Rheinland-Westfalen. We are facing different threats. The threats in security, but presently the threat against our very personal health. The spread of the coronavirus brings up a huge amount of different challenges. The one is the question on how can we trace the way of the virus? How does it affect the different people? And how to find out where this path comes from and where it takes its way. For that, tracing is an issue. Digitalization, using app to find this track. But on the other side, the question of data security, of privacy, is another huge aspect that we have to see in this discussion. For that reason, I'm very thankful that we have specialists here tonight that will discuss the question in Corona times between health and privacy. We will see the expert, Mrs. Dr. Indra Spieker from Goethe University here. We will have Michael Bernhag from Tel Aviv University and moderated by Mr. Mensemer here that will also be part of this event. Again, thank you very much for all of you of being part of this very special evening here tonight. I hope the discussion will be fruitful. I hope the information will be, for all of us, a benefit. And if you are getting used to this way of communication, or if you want to meet in the analog world in the upcoming time, be sure to go to the right spot. Wherever there are the Friends of Tel Aviv University and wherever there is Tel Aviv University, there is future, not only in brain and mind, but also in the way we deal with it. Let's start with our very special event. Again, thank you very much for participating and a warm welcome again.
To Tel Aviv University.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Christian Kouzoulis, and it is a particular pleasure for me to welcome you to today's webinar, also on behalf of the German-Israeli Economic Association. The Economic Association was founded in 1967 in Frankfurt am Main and brings together entrepreneurs from Germany and Israel. In cooperation with the German-Israeli Chamber of Industry and Commerce and the newly founded Innovation Hubs, we address current issues such as the Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, or the areas of prop tech, construction tech, or smart city, to name just a few. If you're interested in German-Israeli business relations, please contact us. We shall be more than happy to assist you. Well, now, as an interesting discussion awaits us, I don't want to steal too much of your time and look forward to an exchange of views between two distinguished experts in their field, and would like to end by saying thank you to the Friends of the Tel Aviv University, the Law Faculty of the Goethe University, the Buchmann Faculty of Law, and of course, Deal Communication to make this happen today. Thanks and have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Christian Kouzoulis. And now we can directly hand over to the certainly highly interesting and fruitful expert discussion with Indra Spieker and Michael Bienhag. Indra Spieker is one of Germany's leading legal experts on administration law, data protection, IT law, and IT security. She also heads one of Germany's most prestigious institutes on health law, the Institut für Europäische Gesundheitspolitik und Sozialrecht, INEGES, together with her colleague, a new judge of the Federal Constitutional Court, Astrid Wall-Rabenstein. Some of her current research projects are about cybersecurity, privacy, and trust for mobile users, and digitalization of healthcare systems. Indra Spieker will be in dialogue with Michael Bienhag, who is Associate Dean for Research and also Professor of Law. He's the director of the Horowitz Institute for Intellectual Property in memory of Dr. Amnon Goldenberg, and the director of the Pearsall Foundation International LLM program. He researches, teaches, and writes about intellectual property, privacy law, information law, and law and technology. In the privacy field, he served as a member of the Israeli Public Council for the Protection of Privacy, advised the European Commission on the Israeli data protection regime, and was a member of the Schofman Committee on Data Protection. He advises the Israeli Ministry of Health on the development of the Israeli Corona Tracing app. We have already received some very interesting information in the welcome addresses, and we already had a very interesting warm-up session yesterday evening. So I don't want to keep you waiting any longer and give the floor first to Ms. Spieker and ask her to share with us her thoughts and opinion on the issues of tracing and or privacy during the current corona crisis.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the audience for spending this day and this evening with us. We are discussing one of the most relevant issues right now in how to cope with the corona pandemic. And that is, how can we use digitalization to make control as easy and as usable as possible, and to make it as self-determined as possible. At least that is the heading under which the German Corona app is being dealt with right now. One of the reasons we are discussing it under these headings is that Germany is part of the GDPR legal regime, and that means we do pride ourselves on looking very strictly at the foundation of democracy, that is individual and informational self-determination. Meaning, if we do not feel observed, we feel free to adhere to our own preferences and to decide in the ways we actually, as individuals, in our dignity, are interested in participating. Now, in times of corona, of course, self-determination, freedom, democracy, they all have already come under a certain amount of pressure because due to the tremendous stress in the system, we did have to look for extraordinary measures. And Germany is, of course, and I'm very glad and very thankful that we get this opportunity to share this, particularly with the leading Israeli faculty here in this area, that we are looking at ways how to cope with the catastrophe, with a pandemic exercise without losing our core values. Now, looking at the Corona app, we can see that some of the core issues will actually be addressed here. And they are not just data protection issues, but they're going beyond that. Let me start with some of the core elements we are looking for. And I'm not going to talk about the discussion on centralization or decentralized storage, because that is something which has already been taken care of in the public. So I assume that all of you who are interested enough to come and dial in today already know about these things. So I would like to point out 2 points first, which I feel are a little bit undervalued in the present discussion. And I will also give you 2 more points, basically, on which we might actually look a bit closer in the future. Let me start with what the GDPR might have as a problematic issue with the Corona app as it is being developed in Germany. The first is that it is a voluntary measure, and this is great, this is good, this is part of a freedom approach. But voluntary only goes so far as there are no strings attached to the decision. And what we have already seen is quite a few politicians, quite a few institutions calling for the app and the data which the app is able to produce and to collect to be used for different purposes. Is it still a voluntary act if you know that if you don't sign up for the app, you might be liable afterwards? Particularly if you are in certain professions such as teaching or nursing, etc. Second thing is, we are looking for voluntary aspects in order to increase the acceptance of such a device and to increase the acceptance of digitalization products. Is it, in the sense of acceptance, really fruitful to use not a strict purpose limitation, but to allow the data which is being collected to be used for different purposes? I'm very sure that Michael Bernhack will identify some of the problems that go along with this from the Israeli experience. Now, those are 2 questions which can be answered to a certain extent by applying the GDPR. So definitely second-order problems which arise from the non-voluntary results, which then create pressure on whether or not you agree to using the data, is something you might have a bit of a problem with, and also the purpose limitation might be something we have to discuss. Let me also point out 2 more issues that go beyond the actual use of the data in this particular sense. What we see is a huge cooperation effort of a number of professional players in the field of digitalization in Germany. And this is an effort and an endeavor we've not seen so far. So this is maybe something we should learn from the application of the Corona app, that if there is a common goal, we can get different actors from businesses, from the economic sphere, but also NGOs to work together. And the third point, where my fourth and final big point is, we are dealing with a tremendous health crisis where we don't really know how far this is going to change our world. We do see that digitalization has taken an effect. Something like this would probably not have taken place if it wasn't for Corona. So there is some good in it, actually. On the other hand, we see that a lot of data is being created in order to cure a health problem. And some of those problems might actually then create, or the solution to these problems might create other problems on a different level. We need to look very careful, particularly if we're dealing with health data, if we're dealing with research agendas, if we're dealing with the interest of different players in the market, in different societies, in different settings, being interested in civilian information, basically. And this is something where we need to control the state, but where we also need to control the desire of privates in too easily accessible data. And with that, I would like to give the word, pass on to Michael to describe the Israeli side of it, which I'm very sure is of great interest to most of those in this panel, because Israel has a very different approach in many senses, but also already has a huge and tremendous experience, rather than us in Germany talking about a potential app maybe being introduced in the next week.
So thank you so much, Professor Speaker. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with the audience. Thank you for having me, and a special and warm welcome to some of my former students from Germany who studied at Tel Aviv University in our LLM program. So I know some of you are in the audience, so a special and warm welcome to you too. Indeed, these are trying times. And when this crisis just started, so within it was overwhelming, and so many things were happening at once. But I had the sense that privacy will be a victim of one of the victims of this crisis. And sometimes I think of it as another kind of a 9/11 in terms of the impact on privacy. Over here in Israel, it's often the case in the public discourse, and especially the governmental discourse, that privacy is juxtaposed with life, with public health and public safety and life. And when you place privacy on the one hand and life on the other, it's easy. It's obvious that life wins, and whatever privacy, we have to sort of deal with it, and it becomes far less important. What I would like to argue is that we should and we can have both privacy and public health and security and life. And it's not always easy to achieve having both ends. What we have seen in the Israeli scene over the last 2.5 months is that the Israeli government has done both things, privacy or privacy or public health at the same time. And these are two parallel and, in my opinion, conflicting approaches. One approach was to develop an app, a contact tracing app. Israel was relatively early in the day, and on March 22nd, the Israeli Ministry of Health launched such an app. Korea, Taiwan, Singapore were before, but I think we were 4 or 5 in that area. And the guys at the Ministry of Health, the team, purely feminine team, by the way, that designed the application, they did privacy by design or data protection by design. They didn't know that this is what they're doing, but they had a very good intuition about the importance of privacy. Hence, they contacted me too and asked for my advice and endorsement, which I did give. At the same time, the Israeli government has announced and used a completely different avenue, and that is recruiting the Shin Bet. The Shin Bet is the General Security Agency. So typically, it's an agency that acts in quiet, in darkness, and its goal is national security. And they fight terror, and unfortunately, they have work to do. Apparently, the Shin Bet has a huge database about Israeli citizens. Now, many of us have suspected that this is the case, but we did not know for sure. Now it's up in the open. Apparently, since at least 2002, the Shin Bet has a database about from cell phone, from cellular data. So for our purposes, it's location, but it's also lots of other things. Up until now, they say that they have used it only for national security, but this case of the coronavirus pandemic is such a huge crisis that there is no choice but to use it. So we see on the one hand security and using bulk surveillance against the population. Innocent people, we haven't done anything. Some of us might be ill, but we are innocent people. And at the same time, the government is developing and promoting a voluntary privacy preserving contact tracing technology. The Shin Bet surveillance is an ongoing saga. It has been challenged in the Supreme Court. There's a decision from late April by the Supreme Court on the legality of that. The justices discussed mostly the authority in the law, and they found something, not the best hook, but they found something and said, okay, not the best, but okay for the time being, for a limited time. In the meantime, the government has initiated in the Knesset, in our parliament, legislation. And today there was a hearing in one of the Knesset committees that allowed the government to continue using the Shin Bet surveillance tool, but they limited it dramatically only to specific cases. Now, it sounds better than what we've had, but on the other hand, and that is good news, the number of new cases, new coronavirus cases in Israel over the last 2 weeks is less than 10 a day. So it's very few cases, thank God, and it's easier for the Ministry of Health to track contacts and proximity, etc., just by asking people, asking this diagnosed people, where have you been, who have you met, etc. So it's not, we are in the midst of the legal story, it's not yet done. There are new cases, petitions submitted to the Supreme Court, and the government is trying to promote legislation. We have to see what's going on there. In the meantime, with the app, the Shield, Hamagen, approximately 1.6 million Israelis have downloaded that. There are 9.2 million Israelis, and the estimation is that about 50%, so 4.5 million, have smartphones. The others either have young kids or the ultra-Orthodox, which do not use, most of them do not use smartphones, and some other people. So 1.5 or 1.6 out of 4.5 is not good enough. The government announced today at the Knesset that their goal is 4 million users of the app. So this is the current situation in Israel, and let's continue the discussion.
Speaker Michael Bernack did stress efficiency of the app as an argument, as a legal argument. Would this serve as an argument under German law, or your opinions to Mr. Bernack's notes?
It's a good question, because it sounds as if the European approach didn't care for efficiency, and I would always say that's the first thing we care of. If something is not going to reach its goal, then why do it in the first place? If we look at it, and I have seen from the list of people who have signed up that there are quite a few lawyers here. If we look at it strictly legally, then of course we can always discuss whether an efficiency might actually justify also a more of infringement, which might in some cases be actually a good way of dealing with things, and sometimes it may not be. And we do not really know in the case of Corona how things are going to develop. So I would like to point out that we are dealing with a very, very uncertain situation in which we have very little empirical evidence. And this calls not necessarily for less infringing measures, but it does call for a very, very close look at the measures we take and a very close control. And I think this is something we need to look at if we're talking efficiency. Something that might have seemed to be efficient last week might turn out not to be efficient anymore today. And we need to plug in a concise monitoring of these effects. And this is something I miss in the discussion quite a bit. We are dealing with promises of technology. If these promises are fulfilled, fantastic. But we do not look whether that is actually the case, and I find enough detail.
So, if I may, I would like to continue this line, and I completely agree. We missed, at least in the Israeli discussion, there is some transparency, but not enough. So, on the use of the Shin Bet surveillance system, only 2 weeks ago, the government started giving data about the impact of that surveillance, and the numbers are impressive, I must say. I oppose that the use of the surveillance, of the security surveillance, but the results are good. They claim that the surveillance has identified 4,000 people which turned out to be infected with the virus. And according to the security service, these 4,000 people were diagnosed, so to speak, through the surveillance before they knew themselves that something is wrong, that they don't feel well, etc. That means that the spread of the virus for 4,000 people has been stopped. And in a small country and dense population-wise, that's a lot. That's a big number. However, I would like to see more of the numbers, and the public needs to see more of the numbers and better understand what exactly they are composed of. But because all of this is conducted by a security agency, they do not know how to work in the open. They are used to work, in secrecy. That's what they do. And for them, it's very difficult to go out in the open. In contrast, the application, the contact tracing application, I advised, and that was, open, the door was open when I suggested that at the Ministry of Health a couple of months ago. Used open source, and the application is written, composed in open source, and the code is available on GitHub. So anybody who understands code and can read code can look it up and see that what the government says it has done with the application, the way it is designed, where the data is stored, which data goes from where to where, etc., that they are saying the truth. And this leads to another value. We spoke about efficiency, we spoke about transparency, and Professor Spicker, in your comments earlier, I think you have also mentioned trust. And this is an extremely important issue and principle. The government, the Israeli government, the German government, all governments around the world, they ask us, the population, a lot. They ask us to stay at home. They ask us to keep a distance. They ask us not to visit and hug our beloved ones, our grandparents or parents, etc. They ask us not to go to church or to synagogue or to the mosque. We are being asked a lot. If the governments want the public to cooperate and follow the instructions, we the people, we need to trust the government. And that is difficult to achieve, but it is crucial. And in the Israeli case, when you see that the government, on the one hand, says, please use the app, it's voluntary, Michael endorsed it, etc. And on the other hand, they use, in a very separate, completely separate avenue, but they use surveillance, which implies we do not trust you. That doesn't work very well, in my opinion, and it's a shame. It's a shame. I think without the surveillance, more people would have downloaded the voluntary app.
Okay.
If I may add on this, just a very short notice, a very good definition of trust is that you trust the other person to deal in your interest and potentially against their own interest in a situation where they have the decisive power. So self-restriction is an important tool in creating trust. And when I said earlier that the Corona app just illustrates a lot of things we need to discuss about Western societies, about democratic ideals, on self-restrictions of those in charge, of checks and balances, etc., then this leads directly down exactly that road. And I think your example is perfect. If we feel that we're being surveyed, then why should we take up an offer which will just enable someone else to survey us even more? Potentially, yes, but it's a negative promise if you so want.
Great. And to that, I'm not a sociologist or philosopher, but the idea of trust in the decision makers is closely tied to social solidarity, which is what you've just described, I believe. And we care for each other, and we are willing to undertake measures ourselves which are not convenient, wearing the mask or something like that, but we do that because we understand it might protect someone else. and social solidarity is, I believe, is a strong value in Israel. We go as a society, maybe not as individuals, but as a society, we go out of our way to assist Israelis under stress in, traveling in India, or, and something happened. We would send rescue teams and all of that, and we pride ourselves with such solidarity, and I'm pretty sure many other societies as well. I'm not claiming that the Israelis are the only ones who care about that, of course not. But social solidarity is a very, very fragile notion, and in designing whatever systems, whatever technologies, contact tracing, surveillance, or something else, the designers and policymakers should take measures and translate these ideas and notions of confidence and trust in the decision makers and social solidarity on the horizontal sort of level. They should take them into account. I do not know how to do that, how to translate grand ideas into technology, and there's definitely a challenge there.
Okay, Speaker, do you want to reply directly to this, or? Yeah.
I have lots to not really comment, because I think, and this is a problem maybe for this format, because Michael Bernack and I agree on so many things, but I didn't want to ruin your list of questions that you wanted to pose. But let me maybe just point out one thing, and this relates to some of my research interests actually, and that is solidarity. I think one of the things we have lost actually as a society, and this is not a very legal comment, but rather one from my interdisciplinary background with sociologists in responsible digitalization. One of the problems that might have been is that we have learned to understand how a society works as a whole, that it's not just a number of people added and all finding their individual being as the only measure under which they live. And a situation like this shows that very clearly. I think particularly Germany, with its very, very low numbers of death toll and very strict adherence to the public measures at first, has shown a great sense of solidarity. But the real test for it is still to come. And that is, I think all of us, to a certain extent, if you were in a sort of a stable situation, most people can survive on whatever they have as resources for a couple of weeks. We live in Germany, I think, in a wonderful society where you do have social security. We're talking about societies where people who cannot go to work starve and starve the next day. So we don't live in that type of environment. We're talking about a government which can come up with 156 billion debt in order to push for an increase in economy at the very spur of the moment. But we will have to live solidarity from now on. And I don't want to turn this into a political pamphlet of some sort, but come back to the issue of Corona app, of privacy, of tracking. And solidarity has something to do with that you understand you are a part of a communal, of a social system, yes, but that the social system takes something and gives something. And what we need to feel is that we all profit from it, and that looking at tracking, for example, or at the surveillance state, that it's not just that our data is being used for different purposes, but that we also profit from it. And in this Corona app thing, I think you can very clearly see where the line has to be drawn. And what are the measures by which you can create an atmosphere of solidarity? Sorry, I just switched off my micro. I've talked too long, so maybe it was also Michael. And I think voluntary aspects, for example, self-restriction, all of that creates an environment in which people are willing to give and to donate and give away their data for free, rather than being pressured to do it.
Mr. Bernack, do you agree also on this, or? or not.
Indeed.
Or I could raise a question maybe then before we come to the Q&A session with the participants. So maybe a question to both of you, and then you could maybe reply first. We did speak, or you did speak, about principles of solidarity, trust, principle of proportionality, self-determination, voluntariness, efficiency, and transparency. Which of these very important principles has utmost importance in this case, or on the example of the development of a Corona app? Is there one you would point out, or do they play the same important role?
Well, I would say that they're all deeply interrelated and affect each other. And I think privacy is sort of, is a focal point where if the government promises us privacy, we will trust the government more. If the government promises us to maintain our privacy while taking care of the pandemic and tracing contacts, etc., it will increase solidarity. So I think we don't have to choose. I think we can have, we should definitely try and have all of them together. Efficiency might have its toll. It might require that we do more. But as Professor Speaker has said, if people understand that this is for their benefit, our individual benefit, and our solidarity, in the sense that maybe it's not so convenient, but I'm doing this to support and help others. So if that is achieved, I think we, on an optimistic note, we may find ourselves at the end of these unusual and terrible situation in a better social situation. We will mourn the dead, and the sick will get better, and maybe as a society we will be stronger. But this requires work. It's like a good relationship. It requires some work.
Perfect conclusion for you, from you, Mr. Bernhag, and Ms. Speaker. Also from you before we start to the Q&A session. Or nothing to say?
Nope, I just fully agree.
Right.